Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, issued a heartfelt statement in tribute to his mother, addressing it to Mommy, Mother, Your Majesty, 3 in 1. He expressed his deep respect and gratitude, saying, Your Majesty, it has been an honor and privilege to serve you. Recently, the royal family gathered at Buckingham Palace to read the last will of Queen Elizabeth. The late Queen had detailed how her wealth and estates would be distributed, leaving behind messages about power, legacy, and the future of the British crown. While crowns come with certain disadvantages, they remain symbols of great importance. However, in a surprising break from tradition, it was not King Charles, but Prince Andrew who was chosen to read the will. This unexpected decision left many wondering why Andrew had been entrusted with this responsibility and what exactly Queen Elizabeth had left to whom. The shocking details of her inheritance would soon be unveiled. The moment had finally arrived. Prince Andrew stood before the gathered family, ready to read Queen Elizabeth's will. Buckingham Palace had never felt so silent. It was the kind of silence that settles over a room full of secrets so weighty that no one dares to speak. For years, this moment had been inevitable, yet it always seemed just out of reach. Now, in the palace's grand drawing room, the royal family sat dressed in dark colors, their expressions solemn, their gazes carefully avoiding one another. Though they were all in the same room, each had arrived with different expectations, some with hope, others with doubt, but there was one shared certainty. This moment was monumental. The Queen's will was more than just a list of inheritances. It was her final word, a message from a monarch who had reigned for 70 years. The weight of that reality made everything feel more significant, more profound. The reading of the will was not merely about who would receive what or who might be left out. It was a defining moment that would shape family roles and potentially impact the future of the monarchy itself. At the center of it all stood Prince Andrew. Of all people, it had fallen to him to carry out this solemn duty. His presence, as the one to read the will, was unsettling for many in the room. He was not the obvious choice, not by a long shot. Most had expected King Charles to take on the task, or perhaps even Princess Anne, but not Andrew. There were quiet murmurs questioning his competence, whispers that he lacked the presence and authority required for such an important responsibility. Still, he was the one standing before them, the one who had to deliver the words that could potentially alter the course of their lives. Andrew himself did not seem entirely comfortable with his role. He stood awkwardly before the long table, the envelope containing the will placed in front of him, its wax seal still intact. His eyes rested on it, the weight of his mother's trust pressing down on him along with the scrutiny of his family. He wasn't sure he was the right person for this, but there was no turning back now. Taking a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly, he reached for the envelope. As he broke the wax seal, the soft crackling sound echoed through the silent room. He unfolded the first page, and for a moment, there was an almost tangible shift in the atmosphere. Then, in a steady voice, he began to read. "This is my last will," he announced. For a brief second, it was as if the Queen herself had spoken those words. The mood in the room changed instantly. Some felt a quiet relief, while others were gripped by anxiety. As Andrew continued reading, he began to understand just how much his mother's words would reveal. Her words were simple, an expression of gratitude for the family's support and dedication to the monarchy. But as she moved on to the specifics, things became more personal. The Queen gave instructions to her children, starting with Charles. "To my dear son, Charles." Andrew recited the words, formal, but the message was clear. Charles was to take care of Windsor Castle. There were no surprises there. He had been groomed for this role his whole life. Charles did not react much, only giving a slight nod, a subtle acknowledgement of his position. But then things took a turn. "I have given Sandringham estate to my daughter," Andrew read. That was the first surprise. Sandringham was one of the most essential properties in the royal family's possession. It had always been tied to the king, and now it was going to Anne. The room shifted, eyes darting, and didn't show much, the flicker of surprise on her face was hard to miss. Charles's brow tightened slightly, a sign of his discomfort. This was not what he had expected, and he did not entirely approve. But Andrew didn't stop. He moved on to the next part of the will, about to reveal something that would leave everyone speechless. Breaking from royal traditions, Queen Elizabeth made an unprecedented decision. Some properties that were traditionally granted to a single person were now being given to the family as a whole. Additionally, collective properties were being handed to specific individuals. It started with Balmoral Estate. It will hold a shared purpose, Andrew read. Balmoral would no longer be under the control of one person, but would instead be shared among several family members. This place was sacred, holding the family's most cherished memories. Sharing it was not just practical, it was deeply symbolic. But not everyone agreed with the decision. Charles, in particular, seemed unsettled. As Andrew continued, the personal touches in the will did not stop there. Andrew's voice changed as he moved on to the younger generation. To Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, he read, "I give the Vladimir tiara, which stands for grace and continuation." Catherine's eyes flickered with gratitude, though she did not smile. The tiara was a symbol, a deep sense of history, and now it was hers, a message from the Queen that Catherine would be the future of the monarchy. Next, Andrew moved on to Prince George and Princess Charlotte. The Queen's words emphasized George's responsibility as the future king. His role went beyond simply leading. His strength as a ruler would only be as strong as the people behind him. The weight of the advice hung heavy in the tense room, making everyone wonder what would come next. Finally, the moment everyone had been dreading arrived. Andrew's voice dropped slightly as he read Prince Harry's name. "I leave a ceremonial sword that once belonged to King George II," he read. The sword was a powerful symbol, passed down through generations. The room's reaction was immediate. William shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about the Queen leaving the sword to Harry felt loaded. Was it an offering of peace, or was it a subtle warning? Andrew continued reading through the will. The gifts, the estates, and the advice all pointed to a future that remained uncertain. The Queen had done what she could to lay out a plan, but it was not a clear-cut path. Now her family had to figure out how to move forward. As Andrew concluded the reading, a lingering sense of unease filled the room. Something more was coming, something that would shake them all to the core. The Queen's decisions had left them with questions, and more importantly, uncertainty about what would happen next. Keep watching to find these answers. Tension grew as more palace insiders revealed that the atmosphere became even more strained after the will was read. King Charles had always expected that he would inherit everything. Windsor Castle, of course, was his. Balmoral, too, should have been his. But no, it wasn't just his. It was now going to be shared. The very idea of sharing Balmoral was a slap in the face to tradition. The family had always gathered there, but it had always been under the leadership of the reigning king. Now, there would be multiple people involved in its care. As Andrew read these words, a shift in energy could be felt in the room. Reactions to Queen Elizabeth's will were immediate. Charles was visibly disturbed, his jaw clenched, hands resting firmly on his knees, his face unreadable except for the deep frown that made his feelings clear. He disagreed. He didn't like it. But that wasn't all. As the will went on, it became clear that the Queen had made some bold choices. Anne, who had always quietly done her duty, was now entrusted with Sandringham. She had not expected this and was not one to show much emotion, but a slight change in her posture betrayed her surprise. This was significant. Sandringham was the family estate, an integral part of their history for generations. To be given it was more than an inheritance, it was a responsibility. It was not just about keeping the land in the family, but about safeguarding the monarchy's future. Meanwhile, Charles struggled to maintain his composure. His usual calm was beginning to crack. He shifted in his seat, fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. It wasn't just the division of Balmoral that unsettled him. This was not what he had envisioned. Things were not aligning with his plan. Of course, the Queen had given him Windsor, but that was not enough. This was about more than property. It was about his place, his honor, his role as king. Now it felt as if the Queen had upended everything he believed about his future. William sat next to Catherine, making a deliberate effort to remain neutral. He looked at his father briefly, but quickly averted his gaze. It wasn't his place to speak, but his eyes reflected an understanding of what was unfolding. He wasn't ready to take the throne, but he could see the pieces falling into place. Catherine, ever the composed and supportive wife, sat quietly beside him. She didn't move, didn't fidget, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. She knew this moment was a turning point in their lives, though she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. The Queen's choices, though seemingly well thought out, were stirring a storm of uncertainty. For Catherine, that uncertainty was something she would have to navigate carefully. The Vladimir tiara, a symbol of British grace and continuity, was now hers. But was that enough? Or was it simply another reminder of the immense weight she was expected to carry in the future? Soft murmurs rippled through the room, but no one spoke, not yet. Andrew's voice cut through the tension as he read the next part of the will. They had all assumed the reading was over, but Andrew continued. It was unexpected, and then they all received what they deserved. But would they truly get it? Keep watching to find out. Surprisingly, the second part of Queen Elizabeth's will began precisely where the first had ended, and once again, it was about Harry. I want Harry to take good care of the ceremonial sword of King George VI. It was as if a bomb had been dropped. Harry wasn't there, of course. He hadn't been for some time now. Remember, he had relocated to the United States together with Meghan. But his name was still a part of this. That ceremonial sword held meaning, real meaning. It wasn't just a family item. It stood for service and power, a reminder of the strength of the monarchy and the family's history. But there was something else about it, a message, perhaps. However, that was not all. William struggled to control the rage bubbling up inside him. He didn't like this. Harry had made his choices and walked away from the family. So why was he still being included? Why was he still receiving this kind of recognition? Charles, too, was struggling. His calm demeanor was slipping. The sword was a sign of respect, but it reminded everyone in that room of everything Harry had done. Harry had left the family. He had stepped away from the monarchy, and now to have this powerful symbol handed to him, it didn't sit well with anyone, especially not William or Charles. And however, AED unshaken, she was used to this. She had seen the family's divisions before and had learned to deal with them. But even she couldn't hide the tiny flicker of surprise when the sword was mentioned. The sword was a big statement, and no one in that room quite knew how to take it. Andrew didn't dwell long on the subject. He quickly moved on. To my great-grandchildren, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, I leave not only the treasures of our family, but also the knowledge I've gained over the years. Catherine's heart must have been racing. This was it. This was the moment when the Queen's faith in her children was laid bare for all to see. The pressure to carry on the legacy wasn't just about wearing the tiara or keeping the estates. It was about shaping the future of the monarchy, about living up to the ideals the Queen had held for so long. But then, as Andrew read on, the tension did not stop. He took a deep breath before speaking again, knowing that what he was about to read would change many things. The monarchy's future was no longer just about estates or titles. It was about the younger royals, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and their roles as the monarchy moved forward. That was when Andrew started reading the part of the will concerning them. George, the eldest of the children, was the one everyone had been watching closely. He was already in line for the throne at just 8 years old, and the pressure on him was immense. Then there was Charlotte, the spirited younger sister. Her role in the monarchy's future was much more flexible, but the Queen's words made it clear that she had just as much responsibility as George. The Queen had always been keen on keeping the monarchy balanced, ensuring each member had a significant role regardless of title. Now Charlotte's part in this legacy was being laid out before everyone. Catherine's hand gently touched William's as they both listened. There was no doubt that this moment was essential for them too. As parents, they understood the stakes. They weren't just raising their children. They were preparing them to take on roles that would shape the future of their country. The Queen had given them the tools, the tiara for Catherine and the treasures for George and Charlotte. But it wasn't just about material things. It was the knowledge, The lessons learned over decades, the wisdom passed down from one monarch to the next. Andrew looked around the room, taking in the faces before him, then turned to the next page. To my great-grandson, Prince Louis. He continued reading the final part that addressed the youngest royal. I leave a letter written by hand, a letter for you to learn from, to guide you as you grow. Louis was only a few years younger than George, but this letter, this personal message, would shape his understanding of his place in the family and the world. The Queen's message for him seemed just as important. She had left him something far more personal than jewels or property, a letter. In that letter were the words of a monarch who had lived through it all, who had seen the highs and lows of life, and had learned how to balance duty with compassion. LS, though young, would be expected to understand and carry that forward when the time came. As Andrew finished reading, there was a moment of stillness. They had come to the final moment of Queen Elizabeth's will, and some of her last words would surprise them, as they had also rattled the royal family. The final part of Queen Elizabeth's will, the last moments of the reading, felt like a quiet storm. Andrew, hands still slightly shaking, carefully folded the will's last page and put it down on the table. His eyes scanned the room, but his words were slow, unmeasured. He spoke about the Queen's simple but essential wish. She wished for unity amidst division, strength during hardship, and meaning in the service of others. She reminded them that strong ties connected them, but those ties needed care, understanding, and mercy to endure. Everyone in the room seemed moved by the Queen's call for togetherness. It was a message that felt urgent, almost as if it had been meant for them not just as a family, but as a monarchy. As usual, and kept her emotions in check. Her face was calm, but for just a moment, her eyes betrayed her. Queen Elizabeth had acknowledged Anne's role as the family's anchor. She had been the one to hold it all together in times of instability, quiet, steady, and unwavering. That moment of recognition was decisive, and wasn't one to seek validation, but it was clear that her mother had seen her, and recognized her strength, even if she rarely expressed it, and gave her mother a slight nod to show that she understood. Andrew paused, his gaze shifting toward Charles. It was clear from Andrew's expression that these words were meant to reach everyone, whether they were ready to hear them or not. Andrew cleared his throat, glanced back at the document, and continued. He shared the Queen's hope for the future of the family and the monarchy. She had hoped they would change, adapt, and grow stronger with each new generation. The Queen reminded them that their legacy wasn't just about the crown they passed down to their children. It was about the ideals they lived by, the kindness they showed, and the relationships they built with the people they served. Above all, she emphasized that they were not just one person, they were part of something bigger than themselves. That wasn't all. The Queen also hoped that each new generation would continue to carry the torch for the monarchy and the values that defined it. The crown was a symbol of that legacy, but it was the relationships, the service, and the care that would genuinely define their reign. As Andrew finished reading, he told them the Queen's work wasn't over. Now it was their job to carry it on. The room sat in profound silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable quiet from earlier. It was peaceful, full of thought. Each family member was lost in their reflections. Charles was the first to break the silence. His voice was calm, though there was an undeniable firmness in his words as he addressed the room. He reminded them that their mother's words were a call to action. The responsibility they carried wasn't just a privilege, but a duty. He spoke about the need for complete dedication to the task at hand. His words held weight, and the others nodded in agreement. Their faces were a mix of determination and contemplation, even though each had different ways of processing the moment. The Queen's vision for the future helped them focus on what they shared and what united them as a family, and stayed behind as the family began to move toward different corners of the room to reflect on the reading. The papers were folded neatly before her, and she didn't rush to leave. She sat still, staring at them, lost in her thoughts. The room was now quiet. The Queen's words played over and over in her head. She could hear her mother's voice in those words, a call to strength and a plea for unity. There was no denying the message. The job ahead of her family was much, but Anne had always been prepared for it. Her role had never been easy, and it never would be. She stood slowly, carefully folding the wool back into its envelope, and took one final moment to be still, to collect herself, before stepping back into the world outside. It had been a difficult day, but her mother had taught her to be strong. Once again, and would carry that strength forward. Outside the palace gardens, life went on as usual, but inside, something big had happened. It would change the kingdom and the royal family forever, and knew the Queen's words would help them, even when they weren't sure what to do. Thank you for staying with us. What do you think about Queen Elizabeth's will? Share your opinions with us in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe.